So today we're going to explore the history of the West, but not as a series of political and cultural shifts, but a very sophisticated, multi-generational, multi-level marketing campaign. So each generation is sold a new improved product, a new version of what is life, but is essentially just repackaged or rebrands the same core offering. And so it's designed to keep people invested in this pyramid scheme to ensure that they are sold not to see where they are when we spiritualize time, and so know the nature of their existential status. And I hope that when I explore it in this way that we can frame the entire, say, last pretty much 80 years or so is this one ultimately big marketing campaign. You are the fucking product, as I always keep on saying. And so hopefully what this will enable you to see, you don't have to invest in any kind of narratives that talk about anything else other than your existential status when you're given as a demand center. And so hopefully you might gain something from looking at through this lens. The story of the last 70 to 80 years has been maybe a story of progress. The post-war boom, the counterculture revolution, neoliberalism, the rise of social justice, and perhaps now the dawning age of AI. And we maybe see these as distinct, each with its own values, heroes, and villains. But what if this is not really a linear progression of progress, but literally just a series of marketing campaigns with an underlying, unchanging product that would be you. And this is the touchstone. This is the touchstone for the entire, say, market orientation. Our market-orientated way of life is literally, if you're market-orientated, you're ultimately orientated towards legitimizing yourself as the product that you're given as. You just have to fucking acknowledge this. And so that means to say that everything, every form of communication, it doesn't matter what it is multi-level marketing. It's existential propaganda, as I've talked about. But the way that we can read existential propaganda in reference to the way how you sell people so they get the buy-in to not question what they outsource. And this is done generationally. So we have to get a perspective on it. So each new, say, cultural and political movement is offered as a way, just literally as a manufacturing kind of line, we could say, an opportunity. It's designed to sell the continuum, the continuation of a system, to ensure that we are participants in our own captivation through being sold not to see one thing that never changes, which is our existential status when we're given as credit instruments. So what is the nature of the multi-level marketing scheme? The one that we invest in the marginal self. So at the core of any scheme, there's a hierarchical structure where participants invest in this scheme to climb levels. The product is obviously secondary to the dream of ascent, so social mobility. So in our civilizational MLM, the product ultimately is the self that we're given as, that we don't question the nature of its production. So it is diminished, it is a compensatory being, and it is essentially created when we spiritualize time, or we're beholden to our unavowed transcendentalism, when we acquit ourselves of the truth claim that time is marginal, because you always see it through the interest that leads to discount what you outsource when you can't present what would be an indivisible self. Okay, so we need to look at it from this perspective. And so we can say that, and this because that self, that marginal self, is a given, you're always seeking a return for your actions. We don't question that. And that enables multi-level marketing to sell you social mobility. So the genius of multi-level marketing is that it sells the continuation of that non-questioning. All right, so that's the primary feature. So every new level or product that is offered is, we could say is maybe, if you're looking at generationally, is a break with the past, a new and a better way, but it conceals the fact that the underlying, say, premise or rules just remain the same, completely identical. Let's break this down into the levels. So let's post-war boom. The post-war boom. How can we read the post-war boom? So the post-war boom sold the suburban idyll. So the product was when obviously the mass market came into effect. So you had utopian futurism. The suburban idyll was the starter kit of the consumer, we could say, because that's when, obviously within America, the mass market was developed and the modern consumer identity became the main paradigm, as it were. And the promise was simple. It was to buy into the dream, stable work and consumption, and you'll receive a life of unprecedented prosperity and security. That was the sales pitch. It required no deep thought. The good life was self-evident. And the buyer's journey was literally through the way how you got sold, not to question anything else other than all the accoutrements that were provided for you. So it was very clean, we could say. The house and the picket fence. And what came after that? Well, that would be level 2, we could say. That would be the counterculture revolution. So what's the product there? So if the stifling, say, 50s, with the youth, the expression of the youth, that was something that they did not aspire to, the suburban idyll, they considered it to be spiritually hollow or vacuous, as it were. Well, it meant to say that the product had to change. And so it pivoted, we could say. Another level was introduced, and that was more the rebellion, the counterculture. It was marketed as a radical break to the suburban idyll, a break from conformity of the 50s, we could say. But what happened there? What's the non-questioning? We could say that the non-questioning allowed aesthetics, music, fashion, lifestyle, but the foundational premise was not addressed when you dropped out, because it still required one to sustain themselves. So the freedom was just a niche catered for, we could say. The counterculture became a buyer's journey. It's still predicated upon a world of transactions. It didn't change the world, it's just the items that were transacted. It sold the feeling of rebellion, ensuring that its participants were too busy of finding themselves, maybe the development of a spiritual kind of narcissism, to question the nature of the container that spirituality was placed in as the vehicle. Maybe what's next on the level? Neoliberalism, we could say. Greed is good, to quote Gecko. So that the product was the upgrade for the ambitious. So we could say that there was a hyper-individualized path, and so through maybe the Cold War ending, a newfound sense of the West's kind of superiority. Francis Fukuyama's The Last Man at the End of History comes to mind. Liberal democracy rules the day, and so the market becomes a very vehicle for aspiration. And so this was ultimately another sales pitch, the self-mythologizing. The buyer's journey was ultimately still given. It's about financial accumulation. So this is when the purest expression of money making becomes self-evident as the highest good. So you're always seeking a return for your actions. You're always looking at the interest that leads to discount what you externalize. And so ultimately what happens is that you're sold just a more lucrative version of the buyer's journey. It doesn't maybe have the timber of nuances related to countercultural, the spiritual, in inverted commas, kind of mythologizing. Doesn't mean to say it doesn't have its own mythologizing, of course it does. but the noblest pursuit was the individual in reference to the compensation, and so therefore that was the buy-in. Level 4, social justice, perhaps selling grievance. So all the ills of the world now come home. Maybe we could say, if through neoliberal practices that led to obviously disparity and inequality, you could see that a level in this multi-level marketing campaign was to provide an out for social conscience. So if the individualism of the prior, say, level was people railed against that through obviously what kind of world there is when you essentially discount or externalize, say, the cost of that individualism. Well, a social conscience is then now sold so people can invest in movements of social justice. And so in that way, you have movements in reference to addressing equality. So that looks at, anti-globalism movements, still obviously occurring now, social justice that maybe relate to the grievance of, especially against Western countries. But this is sold obviously sold to Western audience. It's not sold to anybody else outside the Western audience, because you've got to think of the civilizational domain that we're talking about here. If you are investing yourself in a social movement or social justice, then you're feeling like you are, this is when you become the vanguard of some kind of cultural, not elite, but maybe you feel that you're addressing injustice, become an acolyte, and because you're championing a cause. So the causes ultimately we're aware of can be cycled upon or become substitutable, and you can see maybe that this is developed in response to what came prior. But this obviously enables people to invest in the totalising claim of a buyer's journey, or what we externalise. It gives rise to false dichotomies, or say millennials and boomers, left and right, because the politics is obviously in reference to a worldview. Grievance. So grievance can be obviously invade at the white male, the cis white male. Intersectionality comes along to slice and dice, and then to apportion ultimately the blame for all of the ills of the world. We're all familiar with this, and so invest in narratives that support the diminution of what is the architect for history, and obviously champion the marginal figure. Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement, pick a card, any card. So what's level 5, and perhaps beyond that? It's the techno-utopian promise. So maybe we could say now where the whole edifice is starting to question its own legitimacy, we could say. And so the pandemic becomes a way to break people in reference to what would be offered post the reset. So the reset is in reference to the credit instrument that you're given as, but ultimately it's not put in these terms. But we could say that the whole nature of that initiation, as it were, of the pandemic, however you want to describe it, was to invest in the collective at the exclusion of the individual. And so the biopolitical nature of this thing is revealed through the edicts that you were meant to obviously qualify yourself to access social life through adhering to dictates. And so, but that was done with a sense that you were contributing to obviously this collective good. But that obviously was a sales pitch where the collective good usurps the principles of the individual. And we can also read it from there that you've got the pitch of AI. AI is all the rage in reference to techno-futurists because you're discounted. And so, but AI is considered to be more efficient, so a way of improving, optimizing processes of the current system. That and coupled with that is crypto. Crypto is now sold as some kind of vehicle to address issues of the credit system. And these are utopian promises. They are just another level, where people can invest in what is external. Technological, say, salvation will solve all the spiritual problems. And so therefore that's given as some kind of great utopian kind of vision. And yet ultimately all these levels, this one and the ones prior, externalized questioning our existential status, and asks us perhaps to have faith in the algorithm, ensuring that we never confront the problem of our own embodied self, the marginal self that we get sold on in order to invest in these narratives. So if this is just the levels are given, and they're not necessarily defined by particular, say, time periods. They can kind of lap over each other, but you can see that if you're orientated towards life as a buyer's journey, the accoutrements of lifestyle come first. It becomes more spiritualized. You invest in, say, the spiritual aspiration of technology as an end in order to augment what you lack, not as a human being, but as a credit instrument, as I always say, and yet it's still people will invest in that. And so you can say that these things are designed in a way where we can read the last 70, 80 years or whatnot in reference to just a marketing campaign. You're always investing you're always asked to invest in the credit instrument that you're given as through these things, because you're not questioning your existential status. And the only way that you can do that is when you understand or question the premise, do you have a choice on the way our time's given to you? That's principle. So this multi-generational marketing campaign is designed to maintain you to define your agency, the way how the marginal self is contoured. And so therefore the contouring is in reference to the fit ultimately. So it changes the fit, but it's the same agency. This is the thing. So you can read it in its totality. And so if you get sold on difference, well, that's the difference in the agency or the way how that agency is expressed. But if you're discounting through that expression, the way how you produce the agency that you're credited, then you're sold. You're sold not to see that. You're sold not to question that. So that's why the whole thing is designed to discount the one question that we always ask: how do I produce myself as a credit instrument? And then if you ask that, all the way that people sell themselves currently, left, right, boomer, the generations don't mean fucking shit. That's obviously, demographics in reference to marketing. Ultimately, that's the way how the generations were sold. I mean, generations was never a concept basically prior to mass marketing. So the way how even people get sold on generations doesn't make any sense only in reference to the credit instrument that you're given as. I mean, literally. So you have to ask that, how do I produce myself? Because if you do, then the question that you ask is transcendent to any of the way that you get sold on these levels. You're looking at what is foundational. Because the existential status of every single person in all these kind of levels is exactly the same. And that's the way how you can get a broader perspective of it. And so that's what I ask you to do, is to ask other people that. How do you produce yourself as a consumer? It's all you need to ask.